Coming to you from the HagmannReport.com studio, located in the Keystone State, birthplace of a mighty nation, it's your host, Doug Hagmann.
Welcome to Hagmann. This is the Hagmann Report, where truth can't be silenced. Websites, of course, for the truth include, well, there are three. HagmannReportLive.com. There you can find video, audio. HagmannReport.com, print, show prep, and, of course, for gourmet coffee, the proceeds of which go to help the investigation and fight against child and human sex trafficking is HagmannStore.com. That's HagmannStore.com. Going to get right into it today. Please pray for the people in the South, Louisiana in particular, where 25% of the residents there are without power. Hurricane Laura just storming into the Gulf Coast there, Hurricane Laura. The name makes me laugh, and Eric too. That's the name of my daughter-in-law, and it's funny. I mean, the joke between us, and but what's not funny though is the damage. It's the, oh my goodness! Please keep the people in your prayers, okay? I'm just waiting for Hurricane Doug or something. That would be even greater. Eric the Tech at the helm, getting people ready. This episode is going to be great. First hour guest, Robert McGinnis. Now, you know Mr. McGinnis, Lieutenant McGinnis. He is the author, by the way, of a book titled Progressive Evil. All right? I don't know whether you have seen this, read this book, but it confirms, of course, Progressive Evil confirms that Western humanity, as we know it, is on a downward spiral, thanks in part to cultural Marxism. Now, the back of the book goes further, but what you're seeing today all across the country is the result of cultural Marxism. And I want to just tell you that it's not by accident. If you go to Robert McGinnis' Facebook page, he's got some thoughts about the big picture. The 21st century is going to be defined by the U.S., China, and the global shift to a new type of geography, technology, and economy. And yes, even culture and the possible end times. Now think about that statement. That's a powerful statement. And then keep reading, because every paragraph thereafter, every sentence thereafter, he nails it. And of course, he knows that of which he speaks. But we see people, radicals, anarchists, rioters, I'll just call them anarchists, communist agitators, these well-financed, well-organized communists who are actively redefining America's rights, redefining America's institutions, our ideological basis, ideological drivers, making America globally irrelevant by their actions. With me to actually converse with Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis is Steve Quayle, my good friend, a guy I consider my brother. And in these times, you know, we need friendship, we need friends, we need those people who we can consider as close to us as, you know, our own spouses. And Steve is like that with me. So Steve Quayle from stevequayle.com, qfiles.tv. Steve, how are you, sir?
Just FYI, your audio cut out really bad through your whole introduction. I don't know if it was good on Eric's side, but since we're recording it, should we start over? Eric, did you hear him clipping all the way through? Because both Bob and I heard him clipping. We didn't hardly hear anything. It was sound like robot.
It's almost the way I talk, Steve. Hang on a second.
No. You just need to know it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Eric's checking it right now.
I mean, it was impossible to hear what you said. And I'm not complaining. You just need to know.
No, I know that.
If we don't complain, all the complainers will.
Hey, stand by. Eric's checking that, and he'll give me a thumbs up.
Okay. I think you'd better start over because heard.
Okay, yeah. Let me start this, and really, it bears repeating. It's necessary to repeat, regardless. Folks, with me today, of course, is Steve Quayle from stevequayle.com and qfiles.tv, as well as Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis. Now, I want to reemphasize here, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis is the author of the book Progressive Evil, among other works. But Progressive Evil, this book confirms that Western humanity, as we know it, is on a downward spiral, thanks in part to cultural Marxism. And I can put a period right there, although there's more there. But more importantly is what we're seeing today. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis has given a kind of a thoughts on the bigger picture on his Facebook account. The 21st century will be defined by the U.S., China, and the global shift to a new type of geography, technology, and economy. And yes, even culture and the possible end times. So that's a magnificent and important statement to understand. Now, coming up, we have a virtual conference that Steve is putting on. If you go to HagmannReport.com, you can click on the banner there. It'll take you directly to register for this conference. Robert Maginnis will be a featured speaker there, and it's going to be a powerful presentation all around with all of the guests. So I got a thumbs. Do I have a thumbs up? How did that sound, Steve?
That sounds really good.
Okay. All right.
You're good for you. It sounded okay for you?
Yeah, it did. All right. Without any further ado, let's bring on Steve Quayle and Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis. Steve, I'm going to kick it over to you because you're the man.
Well, I'm not the man, but I just happen to be blessed to have met Bob Maginnis in Jackson Hole, 3 weeks ago when we sent our film team down there to interview him. And it was really neat the way everything synced up and linked up, that he was literally in my backyard and we didn't have to go to his home state of Virginia. Nothing wrong with Virginia. It's just the politics have, how should I say this, made sure the welcome mat to people like me is not out. But anyway, Doug, you did a great job of, Bob's written 3 different books, and The Deeper State, Progressive Evil, Collision Course, and all of this stuff. By the way, you can see a lot of Bob's interviews on Skywatch TV. Kudos to Tom Horn for publishing them. But one of the things that I so appreciate about Bob, and everybody who's watching Hagmann Report today needs to understand, this man lives in the real world of what most are always, we're only hearing third party or second party issues with the Pentagon and the U.S. defense establishment, et cetera, et cetera. Bob's lived there, been there, and he, as a Bible prophecy and outspoken critic of the contemporary Marxist cultural revolution and the wars that are going to take place, he stands for Jesus. And I was impressed, and we became good friends. And, the neat thing, Doug, is friendship in Jesus is one of those deals when God brings people together. It's better than you and I, who know the folly of trying to have certain people be our friends over the years. The point is that God does great things. So I don't want to take any more of Bob Maginnis's time. And Bob, you're going to just go where your heart leads. But I want to talk about, first and foremost, Doug, the AI battlefield. And Bob has talked about this. He's addressed it. But it became really prevalent when it's claimed that in a dogfight, an artificial intelligence program beat a trained fighter pilot as one of the best pilots in the military. So, Bob, I'm just going to give it over to you. When you get tired, you can give it back to either Doug or I, but we're here to give you the maximum amount of time in this hour we have together.
Well, thanks, Steve and Doug. What Steve brings up, I think, is critical for Americans, and especially Christian Americans, to appreciate where we are. We are clearly, in my opinion, and I've written this, at a crossroads, a new Cold War of sorts that could easily heat up. And it's going to heat up with all these new technologies in a very frightening way. There's a quote that I'd like to begin with, and I'm going to read it because it comes from President Xi Jinping. It's 3 years old, but it's very relevant to what we're doing today. And President Xi said, quote, "We will make it our mission to see that by 2035, 15 years from now, the modernization of our national defense and our forces is basically completed. And that by the mid-21st century, our people's armed forces have been fully transformed into a world-class forces," end quote. There's no question that globally, China is a major adversary, that it has every intention of being the foremost military, the hegemon across the world by the mid part of the century. We've already seen that economically. We've seen it in terms of cyber. We've seen it in terms of what they're doing in space and their weapons of mass destruction and a host of other areas. And so, as I kind of begin to follow up on what Steve has already indicated, I think it's important that, this is a new day. We were faced with a major adversary, one that is globally hegemonic, has every intention of taking over as much of the world and its resources as it possibly can. Now, there are obviously prophetic implications here, and I deal with that in some of my writings in the past. What Steve's alluding to is a new program that was just tested. We took the best fighter pilots we had and we pitted them against artificially intelligent systems. And we found, to our chagrin, that even our best fighter pilots could not down a adversary that was run by artificially intelligent systems, a computer. Now, the Defense Department has what's called the Defense, and I'll refer to it as DARPA, but it's Defense Advanced Research and Development Planning Agency. It's a real agency. Most of what they do is behind the veil. It's mostly secret, but things do get out. That's where the internet came from, not from Al Gore, but from DARPA. That's where some of these very sophisticated technologies came from, because we invest through universities, we invest through various secret deals with corporations, the Boeings of the world, and they develop these technologies for future operations. Also in context, and this is important, go back in history to the 1950s. What were we facing? We were in the midst, the beginning of a Cold War. You remember Sputnik and the Russians. You remember that the Iron Curtain was assembled. You remember that there were, it seemed like, millions of people on the other side with many thousands of tanks and artillery pieces that, we thought Europe was going to be overrun. So what did we do? We, with our European allies, formed NATO. Well, at the time, then General, soon to be President Eisenhower, created what was called the first offset. In other words, we recognized that we really didn't want to have to face off the Soviet threat to the world with 92 divisions. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of additional forces than we actually have. And Eisenhower said, look, the only way to counter this massive threat posed by the Soviet Union was to stand up a sophisticated nuclear capability. And so we built our nuclear arsenal, and we told the Russians that we were going to use these nuclear weapons if, in fact, they invaded. And I can tell you, having been stationed in Germany at the time, that we had pre-chambered nuclear weapons. We had nuclear weapons that would come in by air and be shot by artillery, and of course, transatlantic capabilities and bombers and the like. So we had a very sophisticated system. Well, in the the early 70s, we found that we really needed to transform into a new way, what we call the second offset. Now, the second offset was when we started to begin, and we saw what the Israelis did to the Arabs with sophisticated precision weaponry, and we started to really push the envelope there. ultimately, that brought about the fall of the Soviet Union because they couldn't keep up with Ronald Reagan's Star Wars and the like. So precision technologies were the key that really crumbled the Soviet Union. Now, what we're facing with China today is something that's far more temporal, not monolithic, in that we face not only China, but Russia is doing a lot of things. We have the Iranians, the North Koreans, and the like. And it's not something that's just going to come about thanks to the labs like DARPA's that are in secret, but it's going to be a byproduct of the Googles, the Apples of the world that create robotics and artificial intelligence and autonomous operating systems and biotechnologies and miniaturization. This is going to be the third offset. Now, the third offset, which is what we're beginning to really come to fruition and see with regard to China and Russia and others, is going to involve a host of the new technologies, the nuclear weapons, the anti-ship missiles, one of which was just tested days ago in the South China Sea by the Chinese as a message to the United States. We're going to see long-range missile systems, cruise missiles, like Vladimir Putin says he has a nuclear cruise missile that can go around the world. We're going to see counters in space, much like the Russian space torpedo that threatens our constellation of satellites. We're going to see new cyber technologies that will cripple not only infrastructure, but other weapon systems and networks. And we're seeing that more every day. We're going to see electronic warfare. We're going to see all sorts of special operations types of technologies come to fruition. So when you look at the new world, you begin to wonder, well, given all of that, given autonomous artificial intelligence, adversarial ideologies and the like, where do we go from this? What does this mean long term? What does it mean prophetically? And those are things that I deal with and I'm very concerned about. And I try to, as Steve has pointed out, I try to communicate those in a fairly reasonable manner in the books that I write. And I'm going to correct Steve in one regard. I've written 7 books, Steve, and one of those is on future war, and some of what I've just said is outlined in that. And I want to, before I kind of toss it back to you, to illustrate how bad we are at guessing the future. During World War II, the 5-star general George Marshall, as you'll recall, if you just look at his life and understand how it's hard to predict where you're going. In 1901, George Marshall graduated from the Virginia Military Institute down in Lexington, here in the state where I live in Virginia. At that particular time, we had an army of man and animal power, horse-drawn carriages, artillery was drawn by horses. Our Army strength at the time was 3,500 officers and 82,000 enlisted men. And, as you may recall, the Wright brothers flew their first powered aircraft mission in 1903. Advance 40 years later, when he was the chief of staff of the entire armed forces of the United States, we had an army of men and machines. We had an army of almost 900,000 officers and over 7 million enlisted personnel. And we had 4-engine B-29s dropping atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the radical change in 40 years. Here we are in 2020. I don't doubt, as I began, that President Xi is going to accomplish what he has in mind by 2035 and 2050. They are very hegemonic, they're very ideological, and part of that ideology is they hate Christians, much like progressives and what Doug introduced with my book, Progressive Evil. So this is a new world that we live in. It's not the 50s that many of our parents tried to raise my generation in. These are troubled times, to say the least. So I'll send it back to you, Steve.
Well, and Doug, one of the things, and I apologize, Bob, because again, what I was looking at was your most recent books, but Future Wars. That's what I think people need to understand, because here is the deal. Does the Pentagon understand, because you're there, you're retired, but you're still an analyst and you go there a lot, do they understand the spiritual implications of this supernatural world taking over, let's say, a robot becoming demonized, the ghost in the machine, so to speak? Do they even plan for that? Do they? Because they plan for everything, and obviously all that stuff is probably in the spook factory and off limits to the average guy. But what is your take on the fact that, as a biblical Christian scholar, author, and also someone with the pedigree and the practical world that you've lived in the Pentagon and still are a consultant to, how does that fit when you're talking to guys that are just straight military, and they've grown up in the military and they just think it's throw weight, size the explosion, who's first off on the missile, you know what I'm saying? The standard war making mentality versus the artificial intelligence versus the demonic intelligence. Will you address that? Because I think it's really, for those of us who know the scripture, that we're wrestling against Satan. Satan's making his pitch for the world. I don't know that most people understand that, even Christians. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, a host of issues there, which is typical of you, Steve.
Yes, sir. I expect you to answer all the world's questions in 40 minutes.
Yeah. Certainly the Pentagon is full of 24,000 people, and of course, the armed forces is millions of people. The senior leaders typically are very laser focused, and when you talk about things of an existential or other realm, they avoid that. They don't like to talk about the things that they do not understand. What they understand are hard facts about what adversary capabilities are, what they might do, and try to discern what their intentions are from a truly rational point of view. You talk to them about things of the unseen realm, things of Satan and his demonic angels, demons, and they look into the stars and they just don't, it doesn't comprehend. Now, of course, we just launched a new project to look at UFOs. And I think that really is going to send some people for a curve, just because they have to consider the unimaginable and those things that are beyond their five senses, which is difficult for a lot of these what I call using Myers-Briggs, the ISTJs, the people that see the world as black and white, good and bad, and don't see anything other than that. But that's the nature of the bureaucracy. We do have people that are truly deep thinkers that will, push the envelope on what these black and white thinkers will deal with. But most of the decisions are not going to consider, these ideological, spiritual issues at all. I can tell you, after 9/11. I had a friend, and I talk about this in, I believe, Future Wars, that was dealing inside the Joint Staff, which is, works for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he was analyzing what Al-Qaeda and what the Islamists had in mind, how they would, perceive the world, how they would fight, and so forth. And of course, at that time, we were very much involved in irregular warfare, anti-terrorism, stability operations, and the like, having been in Afghanistan. And of course, in 2003, we went into Iraq. And my friend, who was, a lawyer and very much astute, understood the Quran, the Hadiths, the Sirah, and other of the authorities of Islam, he said, this is what they will do. This is how they operate. Well, he was kicked out. He lost his job because he was too straightforward about understanding the nature of the threat. We have today, of course, and I work with these types of people all the time, officers that are experts on China, experts on their thinking, but they often ignore what I consider the more important issues, and that is not necessarily what the Mao Zedongs of the world have said in their little red books or the like, but kind of the spiritual issues that are deeply embedded behind the scenes, the things that most Americans that are at least recognizing the unseen realm would like to understand better. We don't consider that when we write our campaign plans, when we write our contingency operations, and we should. And I've gone through many, many briefings on what we intend to do with regard to China, what we intend to do with regard to Russia. I ask some pretty tough questions, and I get weird stares back because they just don't like to consider these things that they don't quite understand.
Do you believe that they have underestimated Russia's advanced weapons technology? Do you believe they absolutely don't understand the damage? This is my opinion now, so I'm not going to put you on the hot seat. But when Bill Clinton gave to China all of our patents, it was an open fact known, even our top secret patents. So now, do you believe that the contemporary mindset of the Pentagon as it exists now, as you see it manifesting, can even embrace the, if you will, the advanced weaponry? Because Russia's pragmatic, so is China. And by pragmatic, if they want to field a system, they don't care that it's the neatest bells and whistle. They don't even have to have a $20,000 gold toilet seat in their aircraft. The bottom line is that they simply get things done, and they produce quantity, and they produce. So Vladimir Putin, let's take him first. I know. I'm trying to give you the concept, Bob. So take whatever pieces you want of it. But it seems to me that they're continually caught off guard. And I understand I'm not privy to what goes on behind books, but I can tell you this, from what I see, the contemporary things when I read Jane's Defense Weekly, American Military News and stuff, can I say something? As a novice, they were so wrong about China for so long when we were being China chummy, and then they've been underestimating Vladimir Putin. And with China's ascendancy, it seems to me that the left has really tried to break up any chance of communication between Trump and Russia other than collusion. And here you've got, some of the most sophisticated weapons, hypersonic missiles, good night, all the stuff that the Tesla physics stuff that Russia is. So take that if you would, because again, ladies and gentlemen, Bob's going to be one of the keynote speakers at the conference, and there's some really great stuff. It'll be very coherent. Thank you that you're coherent, and we've got him already prepared. But the thing is, answer that to the degree you want to answer that in whatever way, because have we underestimated the weapons development of our enemies, and are we, in essence, because of our mindset in the West, clueless to how fast they can bring something online and deliver?
I would say that we typically are not clueless, but it depends upon which part of this giant bureaucracy called the U.S. government are you going to poke to get the answer. Now, everyone's heard about the 17, 18 intelligence agencies that the U.S. government has. Well, only a couple of them do any real analysis. The others are just gatherers of information. Those that do the actual analysis, Defense Intelligence Agency and Central Intelligence Agency, of the two, the CIA it really scarfs up all of the right types of information and then provides a fact-based analysis. Now, frankly, they got it terribly wrong in 2002 when they fed information to the likes of President Bush and Cheney, who ran with the ball on weapons of mass destruction. That's a different issue, but I've written about that, and I had inside information. But are the analysts that are getting all this data at the agency, in DIA, and ultimately in the Pentagon, are they getting the right type of information? Do they understand what the Chinese and the Russians and others, like the North Koreans, the Iranians, and a variety of others are doing? And how not only are they robbing us blind through their cyber technologies and through their active spying, either through our universities or our high-tech firms, are they taking advantage of that? Well, of course they are. We know that we've lost a great deal of high-tech information that is feeding their industrial base and feeding their armed forces buildup.
May I interject a question, Lieutenant?
Yeah.
You mentioned, or the people getting the right information. I appreciate that question. Here's my question: do we have the right people getting the right information? In other words, is the information going to people that perhaps don't have the interests of our country at heart, who are built into these the organizations, CIA, DIA, and so on?
Well, it is a mixed bag, Doug. I will tell you, without saying too much, that sometimes when these intelligence officials go to the Hill and brief very senior people who you would know if I told you, and they will say, this is what is happening. These are the facts on the ground as we understand it, and this is our assessment. And too often, those people either are not on the listening mode, don't want to receive the information, or try to turn it in a way that is completely distorted. And therefore, when it's translated on the streets through either leaks or through their own public statements, that it's just not representative of what we would consider true facts. That unfortunately does happen. I believe, for the most part, the analysts that I'm aware of are truly well-intended, that they go through a vetting process of taking the raw data and combining it into a picture that, when first presented to the president or his staff, they are getting reasonably good information. Now, it's only as good, obviously, as the source. We can look from on high, we can listen, we can interpret, we can have actual spies in various places gathering information. So it's like a vacuum. You put it all together, you make a picture, and then you respond accordingly. We have been very good in some places and not very good at all in other places. China is a tough environment in which to gather information, especially inside the Communist Party infrastructure. They're vicious, and we know it. And like the Israelis found out in working with Arab adversaries, this can take decades, if not longer, to plant the right type of source and to get the information out. So we have a reasonably good intelligence system. It does get reasonably good information. Sometimes it's distorted by the policy people, whether on the Hill or within the administration. And then it may be translated into, presenting a adversary that is either underrated or overrated. And so, without getting very specific, that's about the best I can do for right now.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Steve.
And I think, Bob, the thing that is also obvious, that with now all the Chinese spies that have been deeply embedded in industry and science and pretty much throughout our government, who've been embedded in all the major electronics labs, any place that had any national security implications, ramifications, or was used by the U.S. government, they've been there. In essence, we've allowed, have we not, and maybe these are my words, I'm not trying to put them in your mouth, but we've allowed the ultimate fox to come and eat the best laid eggs that are coming out of the brain farm. And then, basically, it's too late. What do they say? It's too late, to worry about the barn or the horses in the barn when the fire's already burned down the barn. So given the fact that human intelligence in China and Russia still is at a preeminence over high-tech stuff, like all of our satellite sensors and underwater sensors and everything like that, how do we basically counteract that in a politically left democratic, when I say democratic, I'm not talking about democracy, I'm talking about the Democrats that have open relationships, Nancy Frankenstein, Feinstein, Dianne Feinstein. I call her Dianne Not So Feinstein. The thing is that she's basically had a Chinese agent working in her, and even in all of the hoopla, they're always making excuses. Trudeau in Canada. So how, you're a war college guy, but who said a nation can withstand its enemies from without, but cannot withstand them from within? I mean, it seems to me like, we're talking about closing the barn when Trump is dealing with China in one realm, and everybody, his predecessors, are dealing with them in a whole different, let's be buddies and sell out. How do we, as the American people, really grasp the nature of treason that's gone on against our country?
Yeah, it's true treason. I just have observed that the administration rightly decided to treat the Confucius Institutes in the universities, where we happen to do a lot of our research, as foreign entities, and treat them accordingly, and make them go through more of a protocol to acknowledge the types of business that they're in and so forth. You remind me, Steve, of an incident in the 90s when I was working, I was down at the Family Research Council as the vice president for policy, and I was on the Hill, and I accompanied Wei Jingcheng, who was the son of a Chinese general who happened to be a human rights activist that was exiled after being imprisoned in China. And Wei would go in and talk about human rights, and I would go in and talk about the military threat posed by China. And this was decades ago. And I recall going to this one congresswoman's office, and we were making our case that, we should not have most favored nations status with China, that we should not support, the various, good things for the Chinese communists. And she said, look, and frankly, I'm getting a lot of money from people doing business with China. I just cannot afford politically to do what you're asking me to do by opposing access by the Chinese to our industry and our markets. That was rather sobering. That was decades ago. China has poured literally billions of dollars into trying to persuade our political class to accept, their, position, their views, their market access, and so forth. And they've done, quite frankly, very well. And as a result, I don't think the average American has any concept as to how they have permeated our industry, our universities, even our government. K Street is lined with Chinese money that is seeking access to new opportunities all the way. And that's why ultimately President Trump will be opposed by President Xi and the Communist Party of China, because he's really been a thorn in their flesh. He has caused all sorts of pain for them. And of course, they want to get somebody else in there who they can manipulate. And I believe that would be certainly Mr. Biden, his son Hunter, and others who have a not so glorious history from our perspective with regard to the communists in Beijing.
The horizon of a Kamala Harris presidency, notice why I'm saying Kamala Harris presidency, a Biden incompetency, a Hillary statement that under no circumstance concede Mr. Biden, and then Nancy Pelosi's treasonous, in my opinion, treacherous threat of insurrection and warfare. You know what she said, that anybody voted. How can that be, Bob? How can that be? Now, I understand it is, and you can't get into her head, but there's not, I mean, the thing is that the country's divided. But her statement, I just got to tell you, if that doesn't fit, even the definition of sedition and treason and everything that the Democrats are fomenting by civil war, sedition, treason, I mean, how do you look at that as a military man that's been fighting to keep America on top, so we just don't go up in a giant neutron blast or a nuclear blast? Difference between a neutron weapon and a fission weapon. But how do you see that now in the headlines? Because I'm going to, Doug, with your permission, I want to segue, Bob, into the headlines of the day from a standpoint of our country is divided, and tell me how you see it playing out.
And if I can, and yes, Steve, and if I can add in this, Nancy Pelosi's declaration that President Trump and you and I, all of us here, and all of the listeners and viewers are enemies of the state. Okay, in addition to everything that Steve asked. Just piling on with that. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Doug, when you started to introduce progressive evil and talked about multiple Marxism, and we've seen played out on the stage of America, whether in Portland or in Wisconsin more recently, in Chicago and elsewhere. Black Lives Matter, which, if you look at their lineup of so-called leaders, they're Marxists by self-acclamation. And then, of course, we understand that Marxists, for us Christians, are incredibly anti-Christian and have, would do everything possible to destroy us, not just closing our churches, but ultimately, after they destroy the statues and our history, they'll come out for the conscience of this country, which historically has been the Christians of this nation that from the very beginning embedded the principles, the first principles that formed our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution and gave us Christian institutions that really defined who this nation was and made it prosperous as it has been, up arguably until the recent history. What we are seeing, whether it's Antifa or Black Lives Matter or other associated groups, and the silence from the so-called leadership and the democratic institutions of the Democratic Party, whether it's Nancy Pelosi or Kamala Harris or Joe Biden and others, they just are, I suppose, sitting back and celebrating the fact that what is appearing to be bad for Mr. Trump is, in fact, I think, really energizing many Americans who are just fed up with the Democratic Party's toleration of this anarchy that is tearing apart the cities of this country. This is ultimately what I call a war against God, and we've seen it before. I go back to the end of World War I when you had the defeat of the Wehrmacht, and of course you had the rise of nationalism, socialist nationalism in the German Republic, and then of course they went through a similar period of unrest and anarchy until the leader Adolf Hitler rose to the point that he could create a cult following within a segment of that population that gave him dominance not only in the German government, but ultimately he was able to influence the direction. And of course, the rest is history, what he did to the Jews, but what also he did to the Christians, first trying to enlist their support, but then ultimately incarcerating them. And as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, that they really were at war not with the Jews and not with the Christians, but with God. And they wanted to replace God. And I see that in an interesting way in this country as well. that the left, the Democratic Party that has become the new left, the progressive evil that I call it, that these people see very clearly that they want to replace the middle class, which for the large part has been God-fearing and been mostly Christian in this nation. They want to replace that. They want to destroy it to a certain degree, and they want themselves, their God, to be big government, their God to be the humanist, relativistic approach that they have embraced for so very long. So, unfortunately, what we're seeing on the streets of America is a reflection of what I really see is ultimately a spiritual battle, a spiritual battle between Satan and his demonic forces and the progressives that are conduits of that war, whether it's the mainstream media, which distorts the truth, or it's the associations, or even big corporations that embrace abortion on demand, homosexuality, and redefinition of marriage and family, redefinition and the manipulation of our education system. And of course, then you see the love affair that the left has with the religious intolerance of Islam and the left. So it truly is, and the unseen realm is very active today, and all we see are the carnage in the physical reality, but it's directly traceable to these actors that you started the question with, the Pelosi's, the Bidens, the Harrises, and the others that would first tear apart and destroy this nation so they can replace it with something that is so anti-God that it's hard to imagine.
Steve, you nailed it 25 years ago. Go ahead, sir.
Well, again, the thing that I think is most problematic, I watched the Air Force when I was on talk radio. I've never been in the armed service. By the way, contrary to rumors, I don't take payroll from the CIA, the DIA, the NRO, NSA. And it's so funny that...
Well, you couldn't tell us if you did, Steve, anyway.
Yeah, well, no. See, that's why I couldn't work for those guys. I have a calling. My prime directive in the Lord is warn the people of God. Warn them. But Bob, you were in those years when the Obama that made our nation desolate, that's what I call Obama nation, that made us desolate, the replacement of battle-hardened real generals, conservatives, and all of the military higher-ups, including admirals, etc., flag officers, given the 71, at least as of a couple of days ago, 71 defections of people that were close to the president who claim to be Republicans saying they're backing Biden. What is your, I got to ask you this. When you saw the list, and you know who they are, some of these guys, but we even got 4-star generals backing Biden. And so the thing is that how did that set with you? You're trying to defend the country, and then you have to serve under, I don't know if you were active then, but what Obama did to destroy the military, to implant Marxism, in my opinion, perversion, and to destroy the morale and the morality of the armed forces, what can people take away from this? In essence, there's a war going on out here in the headlines. Well, 50% of the military side with Trump against 50 who won't. What are your personal thoughts on that? As a private citizen, as a Bible-believing Christian, as a prophetic author, and as a scholar on war. There you go. You can take the whole rest of the time for those.
Yeah. On that list was Colin Powell. Colin Powell was my first boss as a young lieutenant, and I knew him somewhat. I didn't know him in his later years, but I wasn't surprised. He had come to where I was in Korea at the time, out of the White House as a White House fellow, but he was not, in my estimation, attuned to the issues that I was sensitive to many, many years ago. The spiritual issues in the units, the thrashing that our country was facing during the height of the Vietnam War. Some of the others, and I do know many on that list, I'm not surprised. They they never were terribly resonant to or reflective of what I would consider, a true patriot. They have their own ideological views. They certainly aren't reflective of my Christian views about what's going on. I will tell you, during the Obama administration, even I can talk about being in the Pentagon during the Clinton administration as well, but during the Obama administration, he put appointees into the Pentagon that were, true leftists. I heard from in meetings, closed meetings, often classified meetings, where they were being influenced by the likes of George Soros and his minions, and I heard that firsthand. I was aware of meetings where some of these appointees that Obama put into the Pentagon were dead set on very clear agenda items that were terribly anti-military, such as one very senior person. All he wanted to deal with was the transgender issue, because he had every intention of using all the power and the time that he had left in office to push that on the military. I know that in 1993, right before I retired at the Pentagon as an inspector general, I was on the task force that wrote Don't Ask, Don't Tell under the Clinton administration. And of course, a couple of us Christians were consistently praying as we were advising the Congress and advising the senior officials. And even then, I saw the weak backbone of some of the more senior generals who really, when you become a general or an admiral, you become a politician of sorts in order to survive, because your appointment obviously is up to the Congress and your promotions are up to the other politically correct senior officials. I've seen this over the years. I've got it the last 18 years in the Pentagon this time, and the politicians, whether they're in striped suits or they're in stars and bars, they're much the same. And I've seen it firsthand, and I find it unappealing. It's certainly the average taxpayer who is doing their part to keep this country going would be appalled at some of the decisions and some of the values that were self-evident amongst many of these officials that I've had firsthand contact with. So, I'm not surprised that there are a lot of political generals and admirals retired and active duty. Only a few truly stand up on conscience and say this is wrong because it doesn't help their own advancement.
Doug?
Sorry about that. I had to reach for my mute button. I mean, there's nothing I can add to that or even question about that. So, it's we've seen this evolution, haven't we? I guess if I want to take this one step further, and President Trump has put a moratorium, I suppose, on the evolution we've been seeing, this gradual, incremental, globalistic agenda, and President Trump, of course, stopping that, or at least slowing it down, which really hacks off the globalists and hacks off the cultural Marxists, which is why we're seeing what we're seeing today. I mean, is it that simple, pretty much?
Yeah, well, it really is. And you saw the Russian collusion, the Ukrainian situation, and the leaks from those within the administration. Steve said in it about some of my books, The Deeper State. When I wrote The Deeper State, I said, what most Americans see are the politicians they elect, and then behind them are the administrative people that are running these massive bureaucracies that kind of, in many cases, use their own political ideology to help make policy that indirectly influences stuff. Then, of course, you see all these advisors think tanks. I used to be in the Family Research Council, which we would provide materials to congresspersons, and then they would read our statements on the floor, or we would influence legislation. Well, there are hundreds and hundreds of these, and of course they're part of the deep state. And then of course you have all the foreign money, and I alluded earlier to all the Chinese money in this town. There's a lot of Arab, Saudi Arabia money, Islamist money, and so forth. But what most people, when they talk about the deep state, they don't talk about the unseen realm. As I've told Steve, my own mother used to be the personal assistant to Jeane Dixon. And Jeane, of course, would have her little seances in the White House and advise very senior people. And, I don't want to go into too many details because there are very specific names and situations, but I have seen firsthand the unseen realm and its dealings within the corridors of power in Washington. And it's not the elected people necessarily, but their influence. It's not necessarily just the admin people that are running the bureaucracy, but their influence. And it's not necessarily all these corporations on K Street or these big moneyed organizations and foreign entities. So it's a mixed bag of all of that under the influence of, once again, Satan and his demonic forces. I was standing in the airport there at Reagan a year ago. Someone walked up and says, "I know who you are, and I agree with you." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, you had said that Washington has a dark cloud over it because of the demonic influence." And I said, "Oh, yes, that's true." And he said, "Well, I agree with you." So people that come here and begin to work here and recognize that they may not be able to put their finger on beyond their five senses what's going on, but if you're spiritually aware, you see this stuff. And having spent much of the last half century here, I see it every day.
Man, I'll tell you what, Steve, I just want to interject. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis is going to be a speaker. Of course, final warning, brace for impact, video on demand for the streaming event, October 16th through 17th. You've got, seriously, I can't wait for this, and I can't wait for you to see this. Go to Gen6, GENSIX.com, because you need to watch this, and you need to watch these speakers. Steve, I'm going to kick it back to you. We're at the end of the hour. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis, thank you so very, very, very much from the bottom of my heart for coming on today. Steve, we're at the end of the hour. Is that okay? I mean,
thank you. And Bob, we'll have you on again. The plan is to have every times on with Doug before the actual 16th and 17th. Thank you so much. And you've only got 400 more questions to ask that I just asked you in the last segment. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you now.
God bless you, Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis. Of course, Steve Goyle, and going to be right back. We're at the top of the air break. Stay right where you're at. And welcome to Hagmann. It is the Hagmann Report, where truth can't be silenced. Websites, HagmannReportLive.com. That's where all the audio-video assets are. HagmannReport.com, of course, for print and show prep, and HagmannStore.com for some doggone good coffee. That is HagmannStore.com as well, and the proceeds go to help investigate and fight human and child sex trafficking and human trafficking by way of legitimate organizations such as Russ Dizdar and Craig Sawyer, two of my great friends, or great friends of mine, I should say, and they have great operations. All right, with me is Steve Goyle. I hope you heard the last hour. If you didn't hear the last hour with Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis, it is absolutely essential that you go back and listen to him, because the information he gave all of us was, sometimes you think, well, I kind of know this, but you may have to hear it one or two different times in different ways. I believe that that hour is standing alone is sufficient to really hit into the heart of people and the minds of people in terms of explaining what's going on. Folks, don't forget, final warning, brace for impact. It's coming up quick here, October 16th and 17th. All you have to do is either go to HagmannReport.com and click on the banner, or go directly to Gen6.com and take a look. Take a look at the speaker lineup. My goodness. Or go to SteveQuayle.com and click on that link. But Gen6.com, that's where to go to get the streaming, the video on demand, Final Warning Conference 2020. And I have a feeling Final Warning is just that, final warning. My goodness. Okay, coming up, Steve Quayle from Steve Quayle. What's that? Oh, great. Okay. Talking to Eric the Tech, of course, who makes the magic happen here. And I appreciate him more than I can actually tell everyone. Steve Quayle from SteveQuayle.com. And, of course, now we have a very special guest. We did not announce this before, simply because of the delicate nature of communications these days and how people just don't want the truth to come out. Well, we are the Hagmann Report, where truth can't be silenced. So with Steve Quayle and myself is a gentleman that we're going to call Wrecker, okay? Like a wrecker ball, okay? But Wrecker. He's an active federal law enforcement officer, and he's been in riot centers and watching what's going on, taking place all over the country, all over the United States. This is not by accident, of course, what we're seeing, as I've said, and and as Steve said, but this is a realistic view of the anarchy, the communist takeover, or the attempted communist takeover of the United States. We see the street urchins, okay, on the streets, the useful idiots that are doing the bidding of those behind the scenes. And some people, and who's pulling the strings behind the scenes? Who's paying for those big shipments of bricks? Who's causing them to be delivered? Who's paying for the body armor? Who's paying of the anarchists and so on? Those are some interesting questions and even more interesting answers. So with me, SteveQuayle.com. Or Steve Quayle from SteveQuayle.com, and active federal law enforcement. And the reason we're not giving his name, look, he's active, and I'm just going to leave it at that. He's within one of the agencies, and Steve can, if you have any questions, of course, Steve can handle it better than I can, because, and I've met this person, by the way, and he's been on our show before, but I've met him in person. I know him, or I believe I know him in terms of what he does. I'll put a period there and kick it over to Steve. Steve, how are you, sir?
Good, Doug, and thank you again. And just to put into perspective, ladies and gentlemen, this year's final warning, brace for impact, links and syncs exactly with the acceleration of the prophetic word through men like Dana Coverstone and others. And Wrecker, who I'm bringing on now, he'll be on only obviously by audio, but he lives in that world. He also is a Bible-believing, prayer, Jesus-following, prophetic understanding guy. He's obviously a friend of mine for a number of years. Yes, I know him face-to-face. Yes, you wouldn't want to deal with him face-to-face in anything other than a friend mode, okay?
I could whip him.
He's like the Incredible Hulk, but he's got a heart for his country. He is a Marine. I'm told you never refer to Marines as former Marines, because once a Marine, always a Marine. So, Record today, I've asked you to come on and give the bottom line as you see it, because this is too late in the game. Pollyanna doesn't, have any position in the reality we're now seeing in the streets. So please take it away, Wrecker, and just speak your heart. And I know you don't have to pull back, hold back, just give it as much as you feel you safely can say.
Well, Steve, Dave, Steve, Doug, thanks for the very kind-hearted introduction. Gentlemen, sirs, I appreciate being on here today. It's a very, very bad time that our country is going through, not just with the political unrest and the riots, and everybody has feelings now, and we have to be sensitive to their sensitive feelings, but we also have a cataclysmic storms hitting the U.S., which I believe, and I think you may agree, is judgment on this land. And let's talk about that. We are having judgment on this land, and our economy is going to be hit. Our children are going to be affected by it. People are losing their jobs. We have what seems to be, if not civil strife, pending civil war on our streets, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. Well, why isn't it slowing down? You have a lot of people out there who are saying, we'll get through this. We just need to buy time. America's been through this before. No, America has not. America has not been through what we are about to be going through, and I'll tell you why. Because we never stopped the abortion clinics. We never tore down the high places. We never took back our country in the name of Jesus. We never hit our knees and repented. And because we as a nation, not maybe you personally, but because we as a nation haven't rose up and filled our own streets and fought back the plague of Satanists and communists who are rioting and all this other good stuff in our streets, we are being judged. This is what's happening. And you can argue that to the greatest extent that you want, but I dare you to open up the Bible, look into Revelation, and start seeing what's happening and relate it to Revelation. It's happening. And I've been one of those guys, I've been on the fence back and forth. I don't know if this is eschatology so much, but I don't know if this is the end time. But it sure does look it. We sure are filling a lot of the voids, a lot of the headlines that you would see is in Revelation. It's happening now. And here's the other part about it. It's going to speed up, and it's going to get worse. It's not going to slow down. My personal belief, based off of what I know from the Bible, and based off of what I know from the intel of being on the streets and being throughout the various law enforcement agencies, is that it's getting worse out there. It's getting more dangerous. Hey, cops aren't the ones being targeted anymore, ladies and gentlemen. You are. BLM and Antifa decided to take their riots from the streets and put them into the suburbs. Let me tell you one reason why. It's easier for us to disperse chemical agents and to control or lock down a city much easier than it is for us to disperse chemical agents and control and lock down a suburb. There's a lot of people, and you can watch the videos while they're in these riots or these very aggressive protests, and they are going to people's houses, banging on their doors, let us in. Well, some people let them in. I don't know if it's because they're complacent or because they're in fear or because they're complicit, but some people let them in, and they're hoarding them. And then some people say, no, we're not letting them in. And then they get a violent reaction. Those people try to kick their doors down, sometimes pull guns on them. Look, it's going to continue to get worse. And as we progress towards the election, everything is going to get worse. And I believe it must be that way because the Democrats believe it must be that way. Here's why. The Democrats, synonymous with the same word as communism now, cannot stop itself. It's like a boulder rolling down a hill. It can't stop itself. It can only gain momentum until it crushes everything in its path and it meets its final destination. With communism, it's the same way. It's rolling down the hill. It's picking up speed. It's gaining popularity for some odd reason. And it's going to annihilate everything in its path, to include your freedom of speech, to include your Second Amendment. It wants to abolish the Constitution, wants to destroy every effigy of Jesus, and it wants to destroy you, Christians. You are the main target.
If I can ask a question,
Communism.
Steve, may I interject a question here? Just very quickly, what we're seeing today, it's rapidly evolving. Now we're seeing some people fight back. Here's my question: If what you described, suburbs, somebody comes to my door, crowds, whatever, attempting to come in, I take a Mossberg 590 and take care of business, put the Antifa person's head on a spike in front of my front yard. Is this what the other side wants to happen, or would I be doing, or is this what I obviously? I guess my question is: do they want confrontation, and is confrontation feeding into their agenda, or will appropriate confrontation set them back?
Steve, can I answer this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so this is what's going on. This is all. When we went to take down Afghanistan and Iraq, what's happening now is no different than what happened prior. In case people didn't know, prior to us invading Iraq, there was a Islamic Socialist Party, which was what Saddam was part of. That party started to do some of the same things with the Ba'ath Party, harassing people, killing people, assassinating people, trying to take over the economic structure and control the country and formed a dictator. We're seeing the same party rise up here and wanting to do a similar thing. But what we did, and this is very intelligent, this is very well planned, take a group of stupid people, convince them that it's okay for them to break laws, and say, and not only that, we're going to bail you out when you do it, and we're going to hinder the police. Well, how can you hinder the police? Trust me, we're the Democrats, we're the politicians, we can do it. And if you don't believe that statement, go to Portland. They do it. I've been to Portland 5 or 6 times now for operations, and I hate that place. It's a beautiful area, absolutely beautiful city, but I hate that place. You tell these people, you go out, you cause mayhem, you cause riots. While you're doing that, we're sending all the propaganda messages, we're controlling infrastructure, we're controlling economics, and we can take down people left and right as we want by using your freedom of speech and your freedom of press. See, what they've also been able to do is they've also been able to hinder your freedom of speech with this whole cancel culture thing. You can't go out and say anything derogatory about a colored person anymore, but they can say whatever they want about you. It's turning everything that was norm when it comes to freedom of speech against one another, and they use politics, and now legislatively they're using the law against you. So Doug, if you just so happen to have that cool Mossberg 590 pumped a couple buckshot into somebody as they try to break into your door, if you got the Castle Doctrine in your state, you're fine. In some states, you're going to be probably wanted for murder. But here's the thing. They use these type of tools in the systems that they put in place against you. Do they want you to shoot back? Yes. Here's why. They want to take the far right, the Christians, the patriots, the good old boys, the veterans. They want to take our guns. They want to take our civil liberties. And they want the stupid people on the left who are out burning their cities down to be their enforcers, until the point that the enforcers are no longer able to be controlled, and then the Democrats, the politicians, whatever they want to call themselves, will then go after them. That's the way communism does it. You cannot have a person rise within the reach of power that you are already seated at, because then it's a threat. Mao Zedong killed everybody in his own party. After they helped him get elected, he killed everybody. Hitler killed most of his own generals, not just because out of fear or paranoia, but because he knew they were getting too powerful and too popular, and he has to be the high man on the totem pole. Joseph Stalin was so paranoid he killed his own son. So these people don't have a problem with killing their own children. What makes you think, leftists, you will survive this? You won't. This is what we're talking about when we mean the New World Order, when we mean the Antichrist army. No one will survive what is coming. There will be, quote unquote, no flesh left alive, possibly. We are going to be pitted against each other. And just like in a very good science fiction film, The Mockingjay, you're going to have these little fiefdoms that are going to pop up, and the one that will control it is the one that annihilates everybody, because they're the only one who has the military left anymore, and everybody else is their slave state. That's what they want. See, here's my problem with politicians. I couldn't trust a politician to fill a sandbag correctly. What makes you think I want to trust them with, my country? To be a politician, this is an ancient term from Greece. To protect the polis, the city. A politician was originally someone who was voted into power to take care of the people, to take care of the state, and to protect the city and the state. That's not how it is anymore. They protect themselves and their own personal interests. See, our politicians seem to, for some reason, think that they are lords of the manor and we are their servants. That's not the way this goes. But unfortunately, America, we let them get into that position of power. I got a question. Maybe one of you can answer this. How do we take it back? You can't have a civil war in this country and fight against our military. No one's technologically advanced enough. You can't have a 1 million-man army march on the D.C. You ain't got enough people or enough guns. The point of this was so well orchestrated to get us going general direction to the point that there's nothing you can do about it except for endure. And as Christians, we are called to endure, because in Revelation, the Antichrist is going to be given the ability to overcome the saints. My dear friends, my brothers and sisters, those who call themselves patriots, you can have as many guns as you want. You can have the coolest body armor you want. I hope you're trained and I hope you're prayed up, but you cannot overcome what God wrote in the Bible with your stuff. Man can't save himself. The only thing we can do is endure and pray. Steve, I give it back to you.
Well, I think, too, that most people forget the importance of the Lord's Prayer, because we're told and we're commanded, Wrecker and Doug, we're commanded to pray that God would deliver us from the evil one and to basically, lead us not into temptation. Here's the thing. I believe, and you know this, Wrecker, and you practice it and your family practice it, Doug, what's right for everybody else may not be exactly right for you, but what's right for all of us is to be seeking the living God on our knees. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Jesus said the night comes when no man can work. Work while it's yet day. Jesus talked about the salt losing its savor. And you know what's fascinating about that? I said this, basically another way you could say is when Christians lose their ability to proclaim the Lord Jesus Christ, even at the cost of our lives, to declare the Lord God of heaven has sent his son, Jesus, to redeem us. If we don't do that, we become roadkill. And somehow, Doug Hagmann, that's been a really tough thing, and I've said it on your program before. God, you've got to give me understanding, because why is it given power unto the beast to make war on the saints and prevail? And that's what it says in the book of Daniel. But then you say, too, that they that know their God shall be strong and do exploits. And Wrecker, I've come to the conclusion that when Jesus said we all like sheep have gone astray, it's the sheep, unfortunately, God said his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. I'm not calling God's wisdom into judgment, but I think this is the key, Doug. People need the personal relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ, Wrecker, that can tell them what to do, what's right for you and your wife, Wrecker, what's right for Doug and his family, his extended family, for me. Obviously, we're separated by country, but we're united by the direction, by the love, the passion. And Doug, I've never, Hagmann, I've never been a warrior, and you haven't been in the military, but Wrecker has been, and he's seen the worst of the worst. And by the way, if we get a little time, and I don't want to take away from anything, but this is the gentleman that I read his letter on the air years ago when he talked about getting in trouble going into a zombie village in, was it Afghanistan or Iraq, Wrecker?
Outside of Fallujah, Iraq.
Okay, but right now, let's concentrate on the U.S. I get there, I won't come back. But the thing is Wrecker, here is the deal. Why, in your opinion, as a federal agent, has the federal government not done more? What gives, or why, in your opinion, do even your hierarchy guys, your heads, what gives with the ability of even Portland for a local mayor to tell you guys to get out of there when you're protecting government property? I mean, some of those guys have been brought to justice, but here's the thing. How is law enforcement, in your case, how is it divided, in your opinion, on a federal and a state level as the whole country is divided. As I just talked to Bob McGinnis, we interviewed him on Doug's show, but Lieutenant Colonel retired Bob McGinnis. But do you believe, Wrecker, it's just 50-50 that, the country is so evenly divided, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's a military, whether it's not the politicians, because they're in the 90% sold out realm. But the point is, address that. Do you hear what I'm saying, Wrecker, the question?
And Steve, if I could just pile on, Wrecker, it appears that he presupposes, or there's a presupposition there that the military is against the people. So if you could at some point address that, go ahead.
Okay, so when it comes to, and let's just use the greatest example is Portland, or Seattle, the CHOP zone. So you have a difference between state and local law enforcement and your federal law enforcement. So federal law enforcement, our mission is very different. Most of us are set up very paramilitary, and like the military, we have our chain of command, and we follow a very strict guideline and a narrow scope of view that we operate in, unless we're in a task force with a state or local law enforcement. So until we are asked to be brought in, we stay on our mission, okay? And our mission is mainly, nowadays is counterterrorism, human trafficking, it's a very sensitive nature, investigations. The problem that I have seen, and this needs to be addressed, so if you're a local cop, hear it out. When is it that our sheriffs and our police chiefs are going to grow a spine? I'm sick and tired of having to go into places where local law enforcement either is told not to operate or refuses in a way and protect the citizens and protect the infrastructure and protect the things that they were trained to do, keep the peace. Why is it that I should travel thousands of miles away from my family, or, all of us as a general aspect, to go to one city to help hold down one courthouse? Why? Why can I not depend upon the local police department? Well, here's one reason: politics. And this is the thing that is dividing our country and killing our country. And law enforcement needs to take a stand. Law enforcement, are you political, or are you here to keep the peace and protect the public? Choose one. You cannot serve both masters. And as what's going on in Portland, because Mayor Ted Wheeler happens to also be the Portland Police Commissioner. So he can kind of tell the police of Portland, the Portland Police Bureau, to stand down to some extent, like he did to us multiple times when we requested help. And we're left to our own devices. Well, as federal law enforcement, if we don't have that pipeline with local law enforcement, we're kind of limited to what we can do operationally, besides just protect what we were told to go there and protect. So what you see going on right now at the courthouse is Donald Trump saying, we're not giving in. You won't help protect your city. I'm going to show you that we will protect our courthouse. Unfortunately, and this has been offered to these people, to these cities, to these public officials and leaders numerous amounts of time. If you need help with the rioters, with the domestic terrorists, as I like to call them, if you need help, ask. We can deploy in moments. But they don't. They allow their city to be destroyed. They allow their citizens to be raped, maimed, robbed, killed, have their possessions completely burnt to a crisp. They don't care about you. So not only is it the fact that maybe someone should go and start protesting against your city and local state officials, but someone should probably go to one of these police chiefs or sheriff's house and start asking, why won't you simply disobey a politician's order and keep the peace? I understand you may lose your job, but is your job worth more than your integrity? Mine is. I will gladly step down in a heartbeat if you ask me to break break my integrity and my will to protect this nation, which I've been doing since I was 17 years old. I've been in service with the government since I was 17. I will live and die protecting this nation because I love this nation. I love the people of this nation. And I love all the people of this nation. However, your public officials have shown you they don't care about you. And is it all part of the plan? It seems to be. It seems to be that way because I know police tactics and I know the ways that we could move people off streets, but yet, no, we're just going to let them burn this business down and then burn that business down and then burn that business down. When does it stop? Arsonery. This is not only is this a felony, but you could potentially have people killed. It could become a very lethal situation very fast. Not only is it a panicked and fluid moment that we're traveling through as a riot is moving from one street corner to another, but it's a mob. It's not just a riot. They're not peaceful protesters. And CNN lies about it, and Fox News lies about it. They all lie about it. All your politicians continue to say the same thing, just like the Nazis used to do. Oh, well, Hitler's just, he's trying to tidy up things. No, they're not. They're trying to take over this nation. And as long as the sheep will sit inside their stable and chew on their hay and do what they're told, your nation's going to be taken from you. We're not going to get it back. Now, I don't know if a quote-unquote civil war is the way to go about it, but you can damn sure go out and vote. You can get out there and protest. You can get outside of your comfort zone and fight back since no one else will. Look at Kenosha, Wisconsin. Look what ended up happening. The police, I don't know if they stood down, if they were told to stand down, or they just decided we'll allow them to burn X, Y, and Z because that's what their leftist public official wanted. But you ended up getting the wrong thing happening. Now, I'm going to step on a lot of people's toes, and I really don't mean to. But hear me out when I say this. Law enforcement is professionally trained. We understand our restrictions. We understand the use of force and de-escalation training. We understand laws and regulations. We also understand how to people under arrest and how to detain them, when to do it, when not to, how long to keep them in detention. We understand your rights. A mob doesn't. Neither does a vigilante militia. And this 17-year-old kid who just killed two people is the result of patriots having to come out and protect their nation, protect their belongings, and guess what's going to happen? The full measure of the law is going to be used against that kid for going out and meeting what we all assume are domestic terrorists.
You sound like Tucker Carlson. Just saying, you sound like Tucker Carlson. Go ahead.
Well, whose side is the government on?
Not ours.
I like President Trump. I voted for him, and I'm going to vote for him again because Joe Biden is creepy, and he disturbs me, and I don't want Kamala Harris as president. Though, if we don't come to a vote, and this whole thing gets thrown up in the air, Nancy Pelosi will be the president. Just FYI. That's the way it works.
Let me interject this, Wrecker. You just had Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, calling all of us enemies of the state. You also are picking up all the information, all the different news lines and different people are coming out and telling everybody everything, that this lady plans to go after us the same way Weather Underground wanted to kill 30 million, quote, conservative Christians during the 70s. That population now, they're talking about, she, as on record, is saying they have a long memory. So is Kamala Harris, is saying they're coming after Trump, his supporters. Okay, so then let me ask you this. Do you believe, and if you don't, you don't, but, listen, civil war never benefits anybody. Jesus said a house divided against itself can't stand. But as a Christian, basing my worldview on the word of God, God is judging this nation. You referred to that, Wrecker. How many people do you personally know, both Christian and non-Christian, that even can equate to the murder and the disgusting cannibalism, child sacrifice, all the stuff that's going on, the heinous things, the mockery of Jesus, the slander of the Lord God of heaven, and the majority of Christians don't even speak out against it, and they're first on the chopping block. You want to address that, Recker?
Well, so the majority of guys that are on my team that I work with, well, I say the majority, we're all veterans. We're all combat veterans of the recent Afghan and Iraq wars, and even the Serbian war. So is it going to take ditches being dug and people being brought to the ditches and shot in the back for people to wake up? For some, it's going to. I have people that are, mild Christians to people that are just plain atheists coming to me, and we're talking about revelation now because they see the writing on the wall. God is opening people's eyes, but also God is hardening people's hearts. The love of many is waxing cold. People do not care about your feelings anymore. Here, you want to hear how desensitized we are? Fox News can play a video of a 5-year-old boy being murdered in his front yard by a black man who wanted to kill a white kid. Sorry, but that's the narrative. And no one sheds a tear. No one cries out in agony. Not one protest, not one riot, not one building burnt down. But if a criminal is acted upon by law enforcement, we're going to burn this nation down. So the narrative of the way people think has been completely thrown on its head. People now believe that good is evil and evil is good, just as the Bible told us, Steve.
And Doug, we've Recker and Steve, this is Doug. I'm sorry. I sorry for interjecting, but you know what? I would like to see the Christians, the conservative Christians, out there in the streets in the same numbers, with the same persistence as these anarchist muppets, these useful idiots out there. And why aren't we doing that? Why aren't the Christians, the conservatives, the people who care about the future of our children, who care about that 5-year-old that was gunned down by that demonic possessed piece of crap? Why aren't we pissed off enough to go out there and say enough? I'm questioning that.
If people cared more about this country and their rights and their future than they did about professional sports, this country would look very different. Our priorities are not in the right.
But it's even more than that. You're correct. Obviously, I'm the commensurate non-sports fan, but there is no fear of God in the land. The Bible makes it clear. And Doug, you know this too. We talked about this. When there's the fear of the Lord, men depart from evil. There is no fear of the Lord because here's the battle cry. You compare the great battle cries in history, but, I tell people the battle cry of contemporary claimants to Christianity is meow, 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 meow. And they're looking for a little can of a portion of normalcy and just enough beer, just enough pretzels, just enough. And meanwhile, they don't understand what's going into their mouth. Their throat is being slit. So it's the same thing you're saying. Complacency, apathy, indifference, and fear. Address that, if you would, Recker. The fear, there's no fear of God, and yet there's no fear of, in Fox. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, the fox is always in the hen house. Go ahead, Recker.
Well, why is it that the government had such a problem with Christians, had such a problem with patriots, with veterans, with people who believed in the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, believed in the Constitution, or for prepping? Why was that ever a problem? Because those are people who are going to resist. They're going to resist. They're going to resist the New World Order takeover. Look what's happening in New Zealand. They have more or less banned bartering. Well, what happens whenever you can no longer buy, sell, or trade? unless you have the mark of the beast, which I hear a lot of pastors and reverends and, whatever these holy leaders saying, it's okay, take the mark. That way you can, send your kids to school and you can go to Target and all this other good stuff. And trust me, you take the mark, you're doomed for eternity. Don't take the mark and run away from anyone who tells you to. I believe, this is just from my observations, that the people who have prepped are going to continue to prep. Patriots are going to continue to be patriots. Christians hopefully will continue to be Christians, and the Satanists are going to continue to be Satanists. God has let people settle into themselves at this point in time, and the dice have already been rolled. What's going to happen, Steve, as you said before, is going to happen. It's no longer coming. It's here. And my fear is that when our military turns against us, and our military will eventually turn against us, because they're going to be brainwashed to teach that we are the bad guys, we the patriots, we the resistors, the vigilantes, the domestic terrorists, the insurgents. See, there's a funny thing from a lot of us Iraq and Afghan vets, and if you're listening, maybe you and your guys have had a talk about this before. If there was ever a civil war in this country, how would we fight it? Well, a lot of us have said we would have to fight it the same way the Iraqis fought against us. We'd have to have an insurgency. We'd have to, use a lot of different types of combative techniques that were used against us that we hated. People were mauled and maimed and, lost limbs, or, a bunch of sniper attacks, sneak attacks, all these kind of things. That's eventually what it'll come down to, because you don't have the ability to fight a tank. You don't have the ability to fight a Predator drone. You're going to fight to the means that you are capable of fighting, and that's however it is that you can gain some sort of victory. But unfortunately, it can only last for so long. I believe that the Bible says that when these times come, Christians, stop what you're doing, run to the mountains. That's what I believe. That's what I would be prepared to do. And there's nothing cowardice in that, because you can't defeat what God has already laid in motion. But what is going to eventually come, and I foresee this, is that you're going to have general versus general. Maybe Bob McGinnis will agree to this. You're going to have a battalion commander against a regimental commander. You're going to have a company commander against his battalion commander, or a platoon lieutenant against, his company commander. And because these differences are going to happen, what happens if Donald Trump is no longer the commander-in-chief and Nancy Pelosi is, and she says, all right, now since I labeled all these people enemies of the state, and you've all signed a contract, you're in the military, you're going to do what we say. We're going to have order in the streets, because people's rights are being abused, and their human rights to be able to protest are being abused by these radical right-wing militia crazies out here that are now shooting people who are just trying to, show their political prowess. It's too easy of a narrative to think of, because it's not like it hasn't been wrote down and practiced and rehearsed in other countries. I said from the beginning, what happened in Venezuela whenever we attempted to interfere in the elections with Maduro could potentially be used against us. And I see that happening now. Whenever Vice President Pence and Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo said that we don't recognize Maduro anymore as a president, we recognize Guaido as the interim president, so we are going to now allocate all funding to Guaido. Well, the UN went 50-50. They went, we half agree, and we half support Maduro. But the military stayed. Here's the thing. The military stayed supporting Maduro. Let me tell you why. A military travels on its stomach. You're only going to be able to control people for as long as you can feed them and pay them. Eventually, when you can no longer pay them and you can no longer feed them, you don't have a military. And when all the lights go out and when people lose their jobs and all this crazy stuff, people have talked about on the internet of things that can happen to this country, you are going to have a lot of guys like me who know how to use guns needing a job. People are going to be paying them to protect them or to form their own little militias or their own little armies. This happens in every major country. With the Serbia war, it happened there. It happened in Ukraine. It happened in parts of Iraq. It's happened in Afghanistan. It happened in Mexico. I mean, hello, cartel. The cartel is a more dangerous army than the Mexican army. These things that happen in the country when you have one guy rise to power, okay, y'all all need a job, you come work for me. But it's illegal. Don't worry, we'll buy out the politicians or we'll kill them. Well, people will gravitate to that because they need to pay for, whatever. They need to feed their families. This nation will not be any different whenever the takedown starts. This nation will fracture. It's already on a sword's edge. You can't be in the middle anymore. You have to be left or you have to be right. And let me tell you something. For all you Christians who are Democrats, that you agree with that side, you need to stop and reevaluate yourself. If you're a Christian and you have democratic views, you believe in communism now and socialism, you believe in transgenders are okay, homosexual marriage is okay, you believe pedophiles are okay, and you also believe abortion is okay. Because that's what they stand for now. Oh, by the way, they want to take away all of your rights and destroy the Constitution. So you need to realign yourself, maybe pray a little bit, and figure out what's going on. This nation is teeter-tottering on self-destruction. And I hate to sound like one of those guys who say it may be based off this election, but damn it, it may be based off this election. I'm not the biggest fan of Donald Trump. Donald Trump still hasn't done what he promised us he was going to do with everything, but he's God's man of the time right now, and I just kind of got to roll with that. I got to deal with that. The Bible says that as long as the law is righteous, we have to follow it. As long as the emperor is righteous, we have to, abide by his commands. But once it becomes unrighteous, that's when we resist. It's becoming unrighteous now. And the Democrats already got a head start on us on this resisting thing. It's shocking. I've been in these crowds, Doug and Steve, and I have seen the literal manifestation of a spirit amongst this crowd, like a wave, wash over them, and they just become animated and even more bizarre and crazy. And I mean, you talk about bizarre. Some of these protests get downright bizarre. Not only is it just that, but it's witchcraft. Black Lives Matter, the three founders, the three communist lesbian founders, base all the things that they do with the writing on the ground and the chanting and the ritualistic dancing. It's all based off a Africanized form of witchcraft. Do your research, they say it themselves. So we have the literal witches' army standing up against the people of God. Doug, what did you say? Where are the people of God? Where are the men of God? Where are the pastors at? Get out from behind your pulpit. Get out from behind your freaking computer because you're too afraid to go out into a field and hold a service. You don't have to hold a service in a church. Get outside. Do something. Show us that you're still the man of God that you told us you were a couple Sundays prior. My problem with all this is we got a bunch of pansies out there. They don't want to go out and resist. They don't want to get a ticket, or they just don't want to be bothered with it. Well, don't worry. God will judge you for that. But people as a whole, America, you're losing your nation. Don't let these people into your suburbs. I can show you video after video. There's one in Colorado was amazing. People got on horseback. They got brooms. They got everything that you could think of out of the kitchen sink. And they went and met Antifa and Black Lives Matter as they were trying to march into a town, and they drove them out. That needs to happen in every town. I know that happened in Montana. I know it's happened in Colorado. I know it's happened in parts of Texas. I know it's happened basically where there's still rugged individualism. It's happening. But it's in small numbers, but it is happening. For the most part, America has rolled over and shown everybody how weak and pathetic it is at this point. Trust me, America. Trust me. You don't think people outside this country are paying attention to what's happening? They are. They're waiting. They're waiting for the right moment. just as we did when we capitalize on a nation that's on the point of revolution. Oh, look, there's minerals and resources and economic wealth we can capture. We need to join aside here and start funneling whatever we can to get ourselves into that position.
All right, folks. Steve, record dropped for some reason. I don't know if it was his phone or whatever. But so, Steve, that's pretty sobering. But here's what I think, and I'll toss it back to you. We're working on getting record back. I don't think we're going to make it to the election in terms of. I think this election is going to be our last because it's going to be so contested. 2000 on steroids. I don't know. That's what I believe.
Well, you're right. You're right, Doug. You're right. Even now, as we're on the air today, Mike Adams just posted that the Democrats are basically conceding the election because Biden, remember, Pelosi just came on and said that Biden should not debate Trump. They don't want that because it will show the imbecile. But I think a more important issue is, Doug, and this is really it. This is my passion, okay? I've known a lot of people for a lot of years, a quarter of a century on talk radio. The time we've spent together, Doug Hagman and Steve Quayle, covering the amount of topics we've covered are pretty amazing, but it's by the hand of the living God. What Record has just stated is this. The scripture talks about nations coming under judgment when all the men in the midst of thee are women. That's actually a scripture. Deuteronomy talks about strangers from without will possess us from within. That's what Bob McGinnis just talked about. And it doesn't matter if they kick out one Chinese spy, there's 749,999 more. So the thing is that this is what we either stand now and fight, or brother, and I mean this, and I'm talking about fighting in prayer, saying, God, what do you want me to do? Show me what I can do to be salt of the earth. I'm tired, God, of being, quote, the silent majority. Fortunately, silence is not my gift. But the point is that we have to do it. And I get people, Doug, trying to say, well, why don't you go out and start rallying, Quayle? Because I have read enough war doctrine to know this. I will choose the day of my battle, but at least I know the battle that's on. The denial. There was no political solution to a spiritual problem. Even the 4 years pretty much that God gave us with Donald Trump. We squandered it. We allowed the left. We allowed the devil to take control of the newspapers. We allowed George Soros. And why has President Trump not had that guy arrested? Why? And all of the traitors and all the treachery. We've watched, ladies and gentlemen, the full-scale constitutional definition of treason and sedition play out from the highest law enforcement agencies to the most deeply clandestine services in the intelligence agencies.
You're right, Steve. By the way, we have Record back, so Record, thank you. I don't know what happened there, but thanks for rejoining us. To you, sir.
Yeah, funny how that happens, isn't
it? Yeah.
Just to segue off of what Steve was saying, Proverbs 28. This is verse 4. Those who forsake the law praise the wicked, but those who keep the law strive against them. Evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand it completely. And Proverbs 29, this is verse 9. If a wise man has an argument with a fool, the fool rages and laughs, and there is no quiet. What we are seeing is people who love anarchy, who love violence, who love to go against everything that is the law. And I don't just mean the law of the man, the law of the land, the law of man. I mean the law of God. They hate God, just like what happened before the flood with Noah. They hated the law. They hated everything. They wanted to tear everything apart. It's happening again. Jesus warned us of this. And here's another thing. A lot of people say, well, when are the veterans going to rise up? The last thing you want, the last thing I want, is for the veterans to have to rise up and reclaim the streets. For those of you who think war is fun, or putting on all this cool guy gear and your cool rifles and all this. It looks cool. I hope you're properly trained, but let me instruct you in something. War is work. It takes a lot of work to get to the level that we were at, and not very many people want to stay in that level of work for very long because it's horrifying. No one should enjoy war. No one should enjoy the things that we had to see, and it pains my heart to have to know that the children and the men and women and the innocents and the elderly of this country are going to quickly see that. No country could ever take us over. No country could ever stand toe-to-toe with America and win. So what was the game plan? Make them tear themselves apart from the inside. That's what's happening. Sun Tzu said, in the midst of chaos, there is opportunity. That's what we're seeing now. Amidst all this chaos, there is opportunity for the left to grab hold and to eventually wield that power not only against the right, but against their own people to put them back under control. But there's an opportunity for Christians to get out, start praising the word of Jesus, telling people about Jesus. Start your Bible studies if y'all stop them. Get them back up and going. Keep prepping. Keep training. Keep that sword sharp, not just with spiritual training, but with physical training. Make sure you are in good shape. Because I promise you, if you've never put on all this gear and walked for a long time in the heat, you're going to pass out. You're going to cramp up, and you're not going to be effective in fighting. If there is a fight that's coming, you need to be effective. You need to be in good physical shape. Here's another thing, gentlemen. The main majority of people who are going to be doing this fighting should not be the Vietnam veterans. It should be the men of our age group, the men that normally go to war. You should be the ones who are preparing. I promise you, it's coming to this nation. We will not pass away until this nation is actually seeing war on our streets. There's a great quote from the Patriot. It's something that I've thought about many, many times. Why would I give up my rights to one person or to one tyrant 3,000 miles away and trade that for 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away? That's what we did. All these political people in power, you think they're going to give up that power? Here, let's go down this juncture. Let's say Trump wins. Do you think this stops? It doesn't. It gets worse because the communists cannot stop what they're doing until they get power. If they can't have a revolution of this country, then they'll bring it low to the point that it can be invaded. I personally believe that. Steve, I'm going to give it back to you.
Well, first of all, Wrecker, thank you, because we're up against the hour. Ladies and gentlemen, I asked him to come on to give a reality check. The lateness of the hour, again, and I hope, I know that that's been said for many years, but listen, ladies and gentlemen, people mocked and scoffed and just disregarded that, the warnings, civil wars coming, ethnic wars. Look at Black Lives Matter. It's not Black Lives, it's Communism Matters. That's the statement. But they took the environment of let's say this, ill-trained police that certainly have more training than opening up on a kid. And look, I know there are extenuating circumstances. Or a black man blasting a 5-year-old in the head with no tears shed. Because the pretty people on TV, gee, did you see her? The bottom line is, ladies and gentlemen, the news is captive. And when the news and the truth became captive, you went into a cage of their making. Jesus holds the keys to death, hell, and the grave. And you are caged in a cage not of your making. And all your freedoms and your life, they are in the process of taking. So I would encourage everybody to take Wrecker's admonition. And thank you, Wrecker. Bottom line, Doug, thank you for allowing him and Lieutenant Colonel retired Bob McGinnis to have the statement, because notice, ladies and gentlemen, that as the events and the headlines are increasing daily with more violence, Record referred to the days of Noah. What do you think it was like when Noah was around? It was corruption. There was killing. There was some of the most perverted stuff that we yet even haven't seen. And if you think you've seen the end of perversion, you haven't. Yet we don't care. The church is sitting around playing tiddlywinks, trying to make sure that they're in the clergy response team. I'll tell you what the clergy response team should be doing. They should be repenting before the King of Kings, going, God, I have been faithless in this pulpit. Transform my heart, coming before the congregations. But Doug, thank you. I know we're out of time. Blessings to everybody. Final warning. Sign up, gen6.com.
All right, Steve and Wrecker. We actually have about 2 more minutes, but
Okay.
Wrecker, your final statement here in 2 minutes.
Well, I want to give just a little bit of motivation to people out there, because sometimes I'm a little negative. There's an immutable truth that I've witnessed and dealt with. These reprobates can only be dealt with by actions that most find unpalatable and ungentlemanlike. Because some men are not looking for anything logical like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn. But very few men have the calling from God to protect it. For every man hell-bent on destroying, God sent a destroyer hell-bent on stopping him. Stay trained. Keep that 360-degree situational awareness and stay prayed up. God be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Wrecker. And Steve, in the final 60 seconds or so, it's very sobering, isn't it? I remember 25 years ago hearing you talk about this very time in which we find ourselves. People mocked and scoffed. 10 years ago, same thing. Now we're here, and people are saying, where'd this come from? Many people, not everyone. So, not that it's great that your insight is coming to pass right now, but I'll tell you what, here we are. So final warning, folks, final warning. Go ahead.
God himself states in his word that his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. The main knowledge is they don't understand God. They don't understand the wonderful plan of redemption. We don't understand what it means to be new creations in Christ Jesus. We don't understand the nature of the spiritual battle. So in my own life, okay, I'm saying, God, I need to repent. I repent of this. I repent of that. But God, show me, and this is what I want to leave everybody with, show me what your purpose in eternity was when you offered to me salvation through the Lord Jesus Christ, and help me to walk in an infinite heart of God's love in your purpose, direction, and to stop evil. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil. As Wrecker said, if you're a Democrat and you don't hate evil, I don't think, or a Republican, I don't believe you know the Lord Jesus Christ. And I believe the pressure is going to be so great that just as precious metals are refined in the fire, you're going to see what comes to the top, and you're going to see what's pure. God bless you, Doug Hagman. God bless you, Wrecker. Thank you, guys.
Hey, thank you, Steve. God bless. Folks, that was what a wonderful program. Do me a favor, everyone. Capture this program, download this program, share it with everyone you know. Please tell everyone you know about Final Warning, gen6.com. That's gen6.com. The link is at hagmanreport.com. There it is on your screen. Sign up for it. And you know what? If you don't think things don't change quickly, Nancy Pelosi saying, I wouldn't legitimize a conversation with him nor a debate in terms of the presidency of the United States. In other words, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying there is not going to be any presidential debates. Think about that. You see the agenda. There it is. Hey, Final Warning, gen6.com. Steve Quayle, Wrecker, God bless. Good night, everyone. Until tomorrow.